So let me begin by introducing myself before I go into detail about what transpired. I am 17 years old. It was just a few months ago when I turned 17. I recently received my high school diploma and have always received straight A's. For the past year and a half, my 38-year-old mother and I have been living together. She works as the head chef at one of the greatest Italian restaurants in our city and is a single mother. I was 10 years old when my parents split. For a while, my parents co-parented me until my dad's brain cancer diagnosis. My father managed the trucking company his parents had founded, but he would hand it off to his brother in the event that he became ill. I used to spend each week switching between living with my parents. However, I was forced to move in with my mom full-time following my dad's illness. Despite my frequent visits, I missed living with my dad since, in my opinion, we had always been more closer than with my mother. It's just that my mom has always been a bit too riled up for us to truly get along. We disagreed all the time. She used to constantly argue with my dad, and when we got divorced, it was me. I didn't mind sticking with her, though, because she had her nice times as well. I came to terms with the fact that I would have to live with her after my dad's diagnosis. Recently, my mother and I have not been on speaking terms, primarily due to her connection with her new husband and his treatment of me. 8 months ago, my mother married Mark, a 32-year-old man, for the second time. I didn't know she was seeing Mark for little more than a year until he put in a proposal. She had been very discreet about their connection. Not helping either was the big age difference between the two and my dad's recent diagnosis. She didn't inform us about their connection until he proposed, at which point she made up her mind. I was left with no option but to accept it at that moment. It was primarily due of his excessively pleasant demeanor that I never liked or trusted Mark. Even when he was being kind to me, he came across as too false and dishonest. He always seemed weird to me, if you get what I mean. Naturally, I was unable to tell my mother that for fear that she would believe I was deliberately attempting to dissuade her from getting married or doing some other absurd thing. Although I tolerated Mark, I refused to let him be a friend. 3 months after the wedding, I realized I was correct about him. After the wedding, he moved in with us, and because he coached high school football, he would get home much earlier than my mother. Before my mother returned home, we would often find ourselves spending a lot of time alone at home. Interestingly, in our alone time, he never even attempted to talk to me. However, he would put on the charm and attempt to seem like we were best friends as soon as my mother got home. I could see straight through his little performance, and so could anyone in their right mind. I once heard my mom's bedroom creaking as I was heading to the kitchen to get some breakfast. I was aware that my mother kept a lockbox beneath her bed, which was only known to us. She had the keys with her at all times. She also had an extra set of keys, but I generally had those with me, and I hadn't handed Mark my keys. I knew he had to have taken the set from my mother. Along with a ton of other really pricey jewels, the locker had my mother's entire wedding set from the time she wed my dad. In case of crisis, she also kept a few extra bundles of cash hidden in the locker. She thought that it was safer to keep these things near to her and didn't trust bank lockers. I saw Mark pull out a whole wad of cash and stuff it into his pocket. I stayed still because I was too surprised to move at all. Mark noticed me standing directly outside the bedroom as he turned around. He offered me a broad smile after appearing briefly agitated. He came up to me, wrapped his arm over my shoulder, and led the way to the couch in the living area. There he informed me that he was on his way with the bundle of cash, since my mother had asked him to send her some cash for an emergency at work. He'd assured me that this was quite typical, and that I didn't have to discuss it with my mother. That day, as soon as my mother got home, I was going to tell her about it. However, she informed me right away that she didn't want to hear it. I sat her down alone and said I needed to talk to her about something concerning Mark. I stated that, and she immediately cut me off. She informed me that she had anticipated this and knew it would happen eventually. My mother assumed that I would attempt to persuade her to make amends with my dad and that I would give her the same old line, "Mark is not the right guy for you." I never gave the impression that I felt she and my dad got along well, so I'm not sure why she assumed that. They forced each other to stay married, which would have traumatized me with their constant fights and disagreements, so I was quite pleased when they got divorced. She refused to listen to me when I attempted to inform her. She screamed at me, threatening to ground me if I said anything negative about Mark. I was so enraged by it that I determined it didn't matter if she suffered. It was obvious that she was too enamored with Mark's on-the-surface good looks to see what a loser he was. I wasn't going to stop her from believing a falsehood and maintaining her delusions, especially after she had insulted me in such a way. After that, I didn't bring up the issue with Mark and waited for my mother to see the mistake on her own, something she regrettably never did. This continued for months, and I became further estranged from my mother as a result of her obsession with her husband. It was disgusting because, of all people, it included Mark. Then, around a week ago, my mother made the decision to have a conversation with me about something extremely serious. My mother and I were alone as it was the weekend and Mark was off with his buddies. Initially, I assumed she had some horrible news regarding my dad, but she quickly refuted that and began droning on about other topics. After a while, I became impatient with her and ordered her to stop wasting time, as I had no idea what she was attempting to say. She screamed out that Mark had informed her he didn't feel secure with me and that I made him feel unwelcome, and she really wanted me to leave the house right away. Even though I knew my mother was in love with Mark, I didn't see this coming. It didn't make sense to me to kick out your own daughter because of your husband's fear about almost nothing. I was aware that Mark was worried that I would tell my mother about the event in the locker room and that one day I would make her remove her rose-colored glasses and see Mark for the real guy. However, my mother had made sure that I didn't say anything to her beyond that point, so he didn't need to worry. That was how she had responded to me when I tried to tell her the truth. Anyway, I was so filthy tired of my mother that I simply answered, "Okay then," without even trying to dispute with her. I stood up and began packing. I was packed with a hammering wrath in my mind. To be honest, all I wanted to do was wait for Mark to get home before hitting him in the face. However, I later came up with a better plan after discovering my mother's extra locker keys. My mom was in the living room watching television when I sneaked into her room. After grabbing her bag and removing the keys, I took them away. In addition, I put a letter in her bag telling her to speak with Mark if she wanted to find out where her original keys were. I was determined to ensure he would not get away with this. Upon finishing the packing of my books, clothes, and other necessary items, I made my way to the living room to bid my mother farewell. She seemed astonished, as if she had not really anticipated my packing and leaving that day. That's why she hadn't been helping me and had instead been watching TV in the living room. She hugged me farewell after swiftly getting over her first astonishment. She appeared content with the circumstances and did not have a single tear in her eye. It was painfully obvious that she saw none of this to be objectionable. My dad lived in the suburbs, some 2,000 miles away, so I left the house and got on the bus that would take me there. I used to live with my mother in part because of that. My dad continued to receive therapy and required many hospital stays. His brother, who lived with him, looked after him. I made it a point to talk to him positively and lightheartedly whenever I saw him, which was nearly every week, so he wouldn't worry too much about me. Not only did I miss him, but I also cared too much about him and his welfare to tell him anything about Mark or my mother. I used to tell him lies to get out of answering his questions about how my mother and her new husband were treating me at home and how I was doing. But I had to tell him the truth about everything now that I was unable to continue doing it. I had no hesitation in telling him since I thought it was crucial. I informed him of everything that had occurred. My dad's ears practically turned red as soon as I started discussing the things that had happened that day. I had never witnessed it occurring before. Though it wouldn't be good for his health, I was a little afraid he would lose it, but he restrained himself. I also explained to him that I had stolen the key and the message I had left, so my mother would be aware of Mark's theft in an effort to appease him. He said I was smart for doing that and that it seemed to ease his discomfort a little. At that point, my dad and my uncle assured me that everything would be well and that they were more than happy to look after me. They only consented to let me live with my mom full-time because they believed it would be more convenient and simpler for me. However, they would gladly accept me back if that were the case. I didn't really dislike that my mother had sent me away because I was also much happier with my dad and my uncle. Neither my father nor my mother responded to me at all on the first day. However, my mother sent me a video of Mark crying and saying he was sorry for whatever had happened the very following day. He was pleading with me to return, realizing that he had made a mistake by taking advantage of the person who had poured her entire being into the relationship. In a text message, my mother informed me that this film was meant to demonstrate that Mark felt bad about his actions and that it was his fault that she had to send me out. My strategy had succeeded. Following her confrontation with Mark over the lost keys and message, he was forced to reveal the truth. While it was pleasant to see him cry, it became frustrating when my mother texted me again, stating that she would only forgive him if I returned. She ought to have realized that I would never return to that horrible place where I was always treated like an invisible person. Either that or I was being treated like an inconvenience, and neither option seemed like anything anyone would want to choose. It was absurd of my mother to even leave the decision up to me. She ought to have chosen to dissolve that union and express her regret to me for her actions. She was just as horrible as Mark, if not worse than him, because, at least in this case, he wasn't connected to me. It was not acceptable for her to have rejected me for another man, since she was my mother. Not only should Mark have shown contrition for what she had done to me, but she also ought to have done so. Rather, she was approaching this as if it were a twisted game. Although I didn't understand why she had given me control over her marriage, I decided to tell her that she needed to leave Mark and that I wouldn't be returning. As a reaction to that, she sent me another video of Mark, who appeared to be much more calm, but was still appearing agitated. He stated that he knew where I was coming from, but that he loved my mother and that he just wanted one more chance to demonstrate his love for her to myself and my family. Despite the fact that he sounded as like he was on the point of tears and was ready to begin begging me on his knees at any time now, which made me feel awful, I was still not convinced. I proceeded to assert that my choice was irrevocable. When I finally got a response from my mother, she told me that I was being much too harsh on both of them. Now, here were two mature adults who were attempting to convince me to forgive them, even going so far as to put their happiness and marriage in jeopardy for the sake of me. On the other hand, I was completely uninterested in all of it and just desired to drive them even more away. Because I was at a loss for words what to say to her, I just disregarded her SMS and did not respond to it. A total of 6 days have passed since that time, and she has been sending me texts on a daily basis in an effort to lure me back. Every single day, she and Mark send me a video message in which they express their regret for the way they have treated me over the past several days. She has frequently stated to me in the videos that she will file for divorce in order to demonstrate to me that she is serious about the relationship if I do not agree to return. Yesterday, she even went so far as to tell me that she had been having a conversation with a lawyer, and she even gave me texts to make sure that it was genuine. During the video message that they delivered, Mark appeared to be in a state of distress and pleaded with me to forgive him, stating that he could not afford to lose a woman like my mother. I am aware that I am causing irreparable harm to their marriage, but if I am being really honest, I believe that whatever my mother is doing is extremely unhealthy. As much as I would like to respond to it in any way, I just can't bring myself to do so. In addition to the fact that she is tormenting her own spouse, she is also putting me through something that is completely needless. I don't believe that I should be the one who is responsible for making a decision on what to do in a circumstance such as this one. It is not appropriate for her to impose the responsibility of determining whether or not to get married on my shoulders in the first place. In light of this, it seems as though the reason their marriage had to come to an end was because her daughter was unhappy with her marriage. At this point, I believe that everyone is aware that this is not the case, and I would hate to feel guilty in such a situation. However, she is only placing me in a difficult situation. Therefore, it is not as if I have any way out of this situation. In any case, Mark is not a good person, but he is still a human being, and it is absurd that he is allowing himself to be treated in such a manner just due to the fact that my mother is more wealthy than he is. It is dehumanizing, and I find it hard to believe that he is just going to let her treat him in this manner. Due to the fact that I do not want my father to be concerned about me, I have not informed him about it every single day. I don't want him to engage in another theatrical showdown, since I know that if I inform him, he would undoubtedly step in. I'm in a bad place, but I'm not sure what to do. Why won't ATA decide if my mother should file for divorce from her husband? Update 1. Hey everyone, so I looked over the comments on my first post, and most of them said that instead of attempting to solve all of my problems on my own, I should talk to my dad about what I was going through. It must be true, since I do have a tendency to shoulder everything alone rather than raising my hand and asking for assistance when I need it. Since my dad already has a lot on his plate, I feel uncomfortable informing him about it in case it disturbs him. Since he actually has cancer, it's difficult for me to talk to him about my issues the way I did before his diagnosis. Perhaps I wouldn't have had to go through as much if I had just tried to talk to him sooner. It would never have been permitted by him. I finally told my dad about my mother's unhealthy habits this time. He grabbed her and gave her a hard time. She attempted to explain to my dad that this was not his concern, but he refused to listen. He assured her that he would make sure she never saw me again and that he would be seeking for full custody. Even though my dad and I realized Mom didn't truly care about me, she was arguing against it. When she learned that she had lost custody of her only child due to her decision to prioritize her marriage above her daughter, she became more concerned with what other people would think of her. She wasn't battling with my dad because she loved me. Rather, it was because of me. She had never even attempted to be a better mother, which is something she would have been if she had loved me. It was simply too late now. My dad gave me an explanation of the same things that individuals had said in the comments after I spoke with my mom on the phone. Since I was his daughter, I didn't hesitate to approach him when I had an issue. He could never consider me a burden as a father. He had a duty to look out for me, and his disease would not stop him from providing for me and resolving my issues when he needed to. To be honest, I started crying at that time because it made me realize that, despite his seeming weakness, my dad was still strong on the inside. I eventually broke down because, for the first time in a very long time, I felt loved and protected. My dad reminded me of that emotion again, but I had entirely forgotten about it because of my mother and Mark. I will always be appreciative to him for his unwavering protection of me in the face of illness. Oh my, it sounds so corny, but I'm glad it rings true for me. Second update. I have complete custody as my dad has requested, and my mom will not be allowed any visiting privileges. I'm just a year away from being a legal adult, so it doesn't really matter. But my dad claimed he no longer had faith in my mother. It's clear that having Mark in her life has changed her perspective. She emailed me recently to let me know that, despite my knowledge of my dad's illness, I had let her down by including him in this. She labeled me a manipulative and self-centered brat. She continued by saying how glad she was that she hadn't truly divorced Mark because of what I had said. Because of the petty person I was accused of attempting to provoke friction between them, although I had failed. Now more than ever, she and Mark were stronger. She would be happy to relinquish custody of me since, in any case, I'm not worthy of being her daughter. I don't care about the other few of incredibly hurtful things she said. She is the one who failed as a mother, and no amount of talk will make that any different. She knows that, which is why she's acting so defensive right now. She doesn't even care that my maternal grandparents have threatened to cut her off. She is very devoted to Mark. About this woman, I'm at a loss for words. Growing up, my mother and I had our disagreements, but this is ridiculous. I think she's beyond help. Even trying to make their daughter understand some common sense hasn't succeeded, at least not from my grandparents. We're not going to be able to do that if her own parents are unable to make her come to her senses. Her parents are still able to see me since my dad has been so gracious, and they have never done anything wrong. I only hope she could have learned from them and been able to have a positive connection with her ex-husband even after their divorce. My mom's parents did all in their power to raise her to be a strong, accomplished lady, even though they are divorced. She is over 40 years old now, therefore they cannot be held accountable for anything she has done up to this point. Sadly, my mother has fallen short in every way, as a mother, a wife, and even as a daughter. Third update. Hello everyone, today was indeed a day of mixed emotions. I am now free from my mother since she finally gave up her parents' legal claim to me. I chose to go with my father to the signing, therefore this was probably the last day I would see her. She didn't even look at me. She didn't even recognize my existence. Honestly, I had no idea how to feel, and I still do not. I suppose I'm relieved as well as sad. I'm not sure, I simply feel conflicted about everything. It was not shocking that Mark wasn't present, since the thief had most likely lost all courage to confront me following the events that transpired. In any case, the only things that truly wounded me were my mother's acts. He has no place in my life and should go to hell. To cheer me up today, my dad and uncle took me out to supper, which did help a bit. We also found out 2 days ago that my dad is gradually but steadily improving. It would be very appreciated if everyone could simply pray for him to overcome his illness, since there is a genuine chance that he will. I can't lose my dad since I adore him, and he is now the only parent I have. I simply am unable to. Although my uncle is wonderful, he is not my father, and no one will ever be the same. I'm not sure how much time I have left with him, but all I want is for our time together to be filled with nothing but happiness. I do, however, ask that you continue to pray for us. We appreciate